Despite global headwinds, economic and trade cooperation between China and Europe has been improving, both in diversity and in volume. Is China still alluring to foreign companies? What competitive advantages does the country have? I'm Joerg Wuttke, President of the European Chamber of Commerce in China, and I will share with you my observation on economic ties between Europe and China. Hello and welcome to China Talk. My name is Joerg Wuttke and I'm the President of the European Chamber of Commerce in China. We are presently about 1,800 members across China in 9 offices. We are an operation that basically looks into advocacy work, meaning we are giving recommendations to the Chinese government and leadership, but also of course to our members on how to tackle reform and changes and how to cope with the challenges of the market over here. Well, I'm sort of a fossil over here. I came for the first time in 1982 by train from my home country, Germany, to China. And I've lived on and off in this country for 35 years. So I've seen all the changes that came along. I remember very vividly when I was doing privately a project for poor people in the Qinghai highlands that it took me about 12 hours to go from Xining all the way to the mountain up. And then 2 or 3 years later, it just took 2 hours with a jeep. I've experienced again and again the speed with which China has been developing. And so in essence, that's why when people ask me, is China still alluring? Given that we had a rough 2022, I would say yes, because I've witnessed these changes and the speed with which they happen. So I'm very optimistic about this one. So we have, of course, also witnessed developments in the car industry. Again, in 1982, there was the Shanghai model and 1 or 2 other cars, and that was about it. Streets were empty. And now you see 5 million cars in the streets of Beijing. But also you can see cars in my home country, Germany. I just came back last week, and I saw, to my utter surprise, Link and Neo and BYD on the streets of Germany on the Autobahn. That happens very fast because China has developed the electric vehicle industry so incredibly fast and has sponsored this also in a way that China now is a battery haven for companies. So a new car, 1/3 of the value is the battery, and of course China has the edge there. Again, developing over years, certainly also with foreign investors, but also now bringing this technology to Europe. That brings me to the point, why are we here? Why is China still alluring? Well, the obvious is, of course, the size of the economy. It's about the same size like the United States. Some say it's the largest economy in the world. But of course, it has also other trappings of attraction to all of us. If you look into the chemical market, which is sort of my background, you can see that half of the global market is in China. You can see the car market, again, 1/3 of the global market is in China. And then machinery, it's even more pronounced. You have the Chinese machinery market as big as the US, Japanese, and European market put together. So of course, if you want to be here, you have to be a global player. In order to succeed globally, you have to be in China. The other advantage, of course, is the cluster. China has incredible clusters built up over the last 20 years. Particularly, of course, in the Pearl Delta River, the Yangtze Delta River. Clusters where investors can find a lot of these items they need for assembly to produce their products in many folds, much more than in most other countries. These clusters will be very difficult to replicate elsewhere outside China. And of course, the infrastructure makes a big difference. If you take your items in Cambodia to Sihanoukville, it's 1 road and 1 port, smaller as it is. And of course, if you've ever seen the port in Shenzhen, it's 4 lanes and it's huge and very efficient. I think China has 6 or 7 out of the most busiest ports in the world. And so that just shows the power of the infrastructure and the clusters attached to it. That's why, to European business, China is alluring. Well, another advantage, of course, of the Chinese economy is this very strong labor pool. Many European companies to establish centers in China, for example in Chengdu, in order to work on global engineering challenges. That is something which, of course, is a huge advantage by having this labor pool over here. And then, first and foremost, I think for many of us, it is the demanding, sophisticated urban Chinese consumer. They are not always brand loyal, which keeps us on our toes in a way that cars, for example, get developed under the concept not of moving from A to B, but as a matter of fact, to have a computer on wheel. So European companies operating in China are basically in a fitness center. They are operating here, learning from the Chinese consumer where they have to make new adjustments and amendments. And that, of course, can be replicated in their global business. So in many ways, we have to be here in order to actually grow with the Chinese consumer, in order to get the products deep into the 21st century, where we think we can still make a difference and make better products. So we're here in China primarily to produce for Chinese customers. It's very rare that European companies are exporting. Our customers do, in electronics, in furnitures, in all kinds of items that end up in Europe. And it's successful. If you look into the exports coming out of China into the European Union, it's just staggering how much China is able to sell. I'll give you one figure. In the first 10 months of 2022, China shipped 5 million containers into the European Union. So you can see products all over the place in all the shopping centers. But at the same time, we have been investing here a lot. The stock is somewhere between 160, 170 billion US dollars in the Chinese economy. But don't forget, also Chinese companies have been rather successful in the European market. We assume that about 130 billion US dollars were invested into the European Union by Chinese companies. That just shows you how interdependent we are and how much we actually can work and learn from each other in this respect. Well, we have, of course, the challenges also when it comes to market access here that again would give us a lot of possibilities to do far more in acquisitions, for example. One example is BMW's takeover in Billions last year in the first quarter with nearly 4 billion US dollars. Stellar performance in Shenyang by this German joint venture, and it just showcases if there is a takeover of 25%, you get the real money in. Because in essence, I think we are still underinvested in China. Now, looking into the politics of this, well, the European Union has been coming up with a paper, I think it was about 4 years ago, indicating 3 pillars of how they want to work with China and how they see China. One is the partnership. Of course, that's where we link in business. The partnership that we have as business here, as well as Chinese doing ventures or selling into the European Union market, but also the partnership in many other areas, such as, for example, the climate change. Climate change is something where we have been coming up with a great study in May last year, indicating where European companies can help Chinese companies to grow. Because that's one of the biggest challenges we have here, is to green the energy level in order to get China to peak in 2030 and then to get carbon neutral in 2060. Then we have, of course, the second item, which is competitor. Of course, we are competitors, not only here, but also back home in Europe. But there are third markets where we are competing. Competition, in essence, is good. It keeps us on our toes. It makes our products better. And in order to keep us closer to the customer, it's a good thing that we have competition. But competition has to be fair and square. And that's where our position paper comes in again. It is competition which needs to be leveled. And then, of course, politics starts in our different systems. That's the third pillar, how Europe is seeing China as a systemic rival. That is something coming out from a liberal democracy, and then you have a communist system over here. But that's something the politicians have to figure out how to actually manage this kind of 2 different systems in order to make it possible for all of us to do the other things, meaning partnership as well as competition. Well, let me finish briefly by saying that, again, after witnessing China's growth for 40 years, having lived here for so long, one thing is sure to me is that China has an incredible comeback gene. Again, 2022 was very difficult for all of us, and we are creeping back in economic activity. The borders are open again. we can fly in and out easily, and that's something which we really need in order not only to conduct business, but also in order to have a possibility in order to understand each other much, much better. So coming back to the initial phrase, is China still alluring? Of course, having spent more than 35 years here and having witnessed the largest economic comeback story in China, I can say definitely it's a yes. We have to be engaged with China. We have to be embedded in the economy in order not only to help the Chinese consumer in the Chinese economy, but frankly, as Europeans also to help ourselves. Again, China is an enormous fitness center for us. Thank you.